I should have listened to the whispers in my gut, the ones that told me to walk away from that house on the edge of town. But when you're a reporter chasing a story, reason has a way of slipping through your fingers like smoke. If I had known what was waiting behind that door, I'd never have stepped foot inside. But it's too late for that now. Too late for me, and too late for anyone who dares to follow. The house stood alone, its windows like hollow eyes glaring out at the quiet streets of Vancouver, Washington. The air was thick with October fog, creeping in from the Columbia River, clinging to the trees and swallowing the lamplight. The Hecker home looked like any other suburban dwelling, with a well-kept lawn and a modest porch. But there was something wrong, something that gnawed at the edges of my mind. It was too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can hardly breathe. Inside, the air was cold, unnaturally so, as if the house itself had given up on warmth. The walls seemed to close in, and every shadow stretched just a little too far. The family, Bob, Linda, and their teenage son, Chris, sat huddled in the living room, their faces pale, eyes darting nervously toward the ceiling, where faint scrapes and thuds echoed like footsteps from another world. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A draft here, a creak there, old houses make noises after all. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that our breath hung in the air like smoke. Then it started. From the far side of the room, a stone, small, jagged, and cold, skittered across the floor, stopping just inches from my feet. I stared at it, half expecting someone to say it had fallen from the ceiling. But we all knew better. This wasn't the first time. Linda's voice trembled as she spoke. It's been happening for weeks. First, it was just the stones. Then, the knocking. And worse. She didn't need to explain further. The house groaned in response, as if acknowledging her confession. Something was here, and it wasn't going to leave quietly. The stones came more frequently now, as if the house itself was growing impatient. Each one seemed to appear from nowhere, pelting the walls, bouncing off furniture, rolling across the floor. Chris sat rigid, his hands clenched into fists, as if he could keep the terror at bay through sheer will. But there was something in his eyes, a haunted look that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe there was something structurally wrong with the house. But then came the knocking, slow, deliberate, and far too rhythmic to be random. It echoed from the walls, from the ceiling, from the floor beneath our feet, and then from inside the walls themselves. "Do you hear it?" Bob whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's in the walls. It's watching us." Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated from upstairs. Linda flinched, her hands flying to her mouth. "It's in Chris's room," she whispered. "It always starts there." Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I followed them upstairs to Chris's room. The door stood ajar, the faint smell of damp wood and something else, something metallic, like rust or blood, drifted from within. The room was a mess, but not in the way you'd expect from a teenage boy. Clothes were strewn across the floor, yes, but the furniture was wrong, shifted, as though something had pushed it aside with great force. And then I saw it. The stones, dozens of them, scattered across the floor, as if they had rained down from the ceiling. But there was no hole, no source from which they could have fallen. They were just there. And in the center of the room, etched into the floorboards with a precision that made my skin crawl, was a symbol. Ancient, unfamiliar. And yet, it hummed with a power I could feel in my bones. Chris trembled, backing against the wall. "It follows me," he choked out. "It wants me." The realization hit me then. This wasn't just a haunting. This wasn't some restless spirit rattling chains in the night. It was something far older, something far more dangerous. The temperature plummeted. My breath came in shallow gasps as the air thickened, pressing down on us like invisible hands. The knocking returned, louder, more insistent. It was coming from all sides now, surrounding us, closing in. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the house. Linda screamed as the stones began to fly, pelting the walls, the ceiling, us. I ducked, shielding my head as a small rock skimmed past my ear. Chris stood frozen in the center of the room, his eyes wide, fixed on something none of us could see. And then it spoke, a low guttural whisper that reverberated through the walls, through the floor, through my very bones. "You are mine." I grabbed Chris by the arm and yanked him toward the door. It didn't budge. The stones were like bullets now, slamming into the walls and floor with deafening cracks. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. There was no escape. Not for any of us. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The stones fell silent, rolling harmlessly to a stop at our feet. The air grew still, the house returning to its eerie, oppressive quiet. The door creaked open as if nothing had happened at all. We fled. We didn't look back. The next day, the Hecker family packed up and left that house. They never spoke of it again. But I still hear the whispers, sometimes, late at night. And when I close my eyes, I can still feel it. Watching, waiting. The stones may have stopped, but whatever was in that house, it never really left. So if you ever find yourself in Vancouver, Washington, and you hear stories about the old Hecker house, don't go looking for answers. Some stones are better left unturned. Some doors should never be opened. And once you've caught the attention of whatever lurks behind them, there's no escape. Trust me, it's still watching.